All right, so we're going to get started. Welcome everyone for joining us here today. My name is Dana Lewinter. I am the Municipal Engagement Director at CHAPA. And I send my regards from Rachel Heller, our CEO, who cannot be with us today, but she's really excited to hear back about what we are doing. So just going to get started here in a second. I'm going to share my screen in a second. But in the meantime, if folks could tell us where they're from, if you go to the chat function and click on the chat, you can tell us your name and the organization you represent or the community that you represent, any of those, so that you can, so that we know who is in the room here with us. All right, so we'll get started on that. I am going to share my screen. Can folks see that screen share that I have going? Give me some head nods. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you, Whitney. All right, so welcome. We're all ready to go, and I can see that folks are sharing items in the chat where they're from, so thank you very much for all of that. So as I said, this is our Berkshires regional meeting. This is our 4th regional meeting at CHAPA already, and we have a few more coming up this week and in July. Just for those of you who don't know much about CHAPA, if this is your first meeting, just to let you know that our mission is really to encourage the production and preservation of housing that's affordable and accessible for people who are low to moderate income, and to foster diverse and sustainable communities. And we have a lot of different programs. I will direct you to our website to learn more about what we do, but we'll also be sharing ways that you can get involved with us as we go along. I want to thank our regional meeting sponsor, Bank of America. Bank of America has been sponsoring these meetings for a few years now, and without them, we really wouldn't be able to do this work. So thank you very much to them. And also thank you to our local participating co-hosts. You guys have a great network of agencies and organizations working in the Berkshires. We are going to hear from all of these organizations listed here in just a minute, but I want to specifically thank them for helping us to think through what you all are experiencing in this community and sharing their experiences in just a second. So I'm going to get into our agenda in just a second, but before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Whitney Demetrius, my colleague in the Municipal Engagement Initiative, to walk us through kind of a welcome poll/survey, some questions that you can answer.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dana. So I'm going to launch a poll. I'll start it now, and I'll look for some head nods or indications that you guys can see that. Take some time, as Dana said, to just answer a few of those questions. Don't labor too much over them. We hope it can be part of our driving our discussion throughout today's call, as we're interested to hear more from you all. So feel free to answer those series of questions, and we'll share some of the results of that to drive our discussion. If you're finished early, feel free to look through the chat and see who all is here joining us today. Give you a few minutes to complete.
So as we're waiting for folks to answer, just take a look. You can take a look in the chat. It's really nice to see all of the folks that we have joining us here today. You can see we have a lot of different folks from community health centers and departments of community development, the agencies that are represented here as our co-hosts, some folks from more statewide groups like MHP's Community Assistance Team, I see. Wonderful. Some folks from Affordable Housing Trusts, which is great. Some people who live in one community but represent working in others. So this is wonderful to see all of you here. Some development folks, someone from the AARP, glad to have you join us as well. So Whitney, why don't we go ahead and close that poll, and we'll go from there.
Excellent. So I'll share the results here. Hopefully you guys can see that. on your screens as well. So as Dana mentioned, there's so many of you all representing different groups here with us today, and you can see the results there. Glad to see so many of you all are from local community organizations. So I'll run through some of the questions. The second question was, according to the American List, what percentage of American rental households were unable to make their housing payments in May of 2020? Not sure what just happened with the poll. Somehow I can't see it any longer. I wonder if that's the same for you all. Can you all see that still? Something weird just happened, it just went away. But I'll just continue reading through the questions as I have them here in front of me. Thank goodness, right? So according to American List, what percentage of American renter households were unable to make their housing payments in May of 2020? Rental households, that was 22%. The following question further asked us what percentage of homeowner households were unable to make their housing payments in May of 2020, and that was also 22%. And again, we'll share a lot of the resources to many of the reports that we cited in the questions so that we can share with you all to drive some of your conversations you guys are having on the local level. The following question was, according to the Federal Reserve Bank, Bank of Boston's impact of COVID pandemic on New England homeowners report, the question was, how many New England households are at risk of missing their rent or mortgage payments due to corona-related job loss? And that was actually more than 1 million New England households. The following question talked about the best case scenario for housing payments through April and July, and that was $1.42 billion. $1.42 billion. And the last question had to do with the 3 occupations according to the MAPC report, which we'll share with you in the chat. Okay, I think my colleague here is trying to show me how I can pull it back up. You can click the button on the bottom and pull it back up. It's not letting me do that. It's saying that it's inactive. The session is inactive. So I'm gonna push through. So that was about the 3 occupations, I believe, that had to do with food preparations and serving, office admin, and support sales. Just those 3 occupations alone represented 40%. The last question that we were asking had to do with how many of you all have ever joined us in one of our CHAPA meetings in the past. And we're excited for those who have joined us again, who have been part of our regional meetings in the past, but also excited as well for folks who are tuned in during this time, specifically as we try to do this locally. So appreciate all of your assistance in bearing with us as we're sort of becoming virtual Zoom experts. Thank you for joining us today. Hand it back to you, Dana.
All right, thank you so much, Whitney. I appreciate it. And so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Oops. Did that work?
It's working, but we can see it in the full PowerPoint. Like we can see what you're saying. It hadn't started this slide.
Stop that. Sorry, we'll get to that in a second. So we're going to have a great agenda today, and sorry for some of these technical difficulties. We, despite wanting to be Zoom experts, as Whitney said, sometimes it doesn't happen. All right, so back to sharing my screen. All right, here we are. So, all right, here we go. So our agenda today, we're going to hear in just a second from our regional partners. Then we're going to hear some CHAPA policy updates from our policy team. Then we're going to hear a little bit about our municipal engagement initiative that Whitney and I work on. And then we're going to do some regional sharing, and we'll maybe do breakout discussions, or if we have a group that feels right for it, we'll just leave it as an open conversation for everyone that's here in the Zoom meeting. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can join us for upcoming meetings, events, and staying connected. So why don't we get right to it? and hear from our partner organizations. So here we go. Why don't we hear first from Brad Gordon? He's from the Berkshire County Regional Housing Authority. Brad, go ahead.
Hey, so I just want to quickly, because I see some new faces, welcome faces actually, and I just want to very, very briefly just give an overview of BCRHA. We're a non-traditional housing authority, so we do not have our own housing portfolio. For the last 30 years, we've served as a primary provider of homelessness prevention and housing stability services. We're a HUD-certified housing counseling agency. We're a court-certified mediation program that's relevant for housing-related matters because we do over 250 summary process mediations annually. In partnership with the AGO, we are the consumer protection agency for the county, and we enjoy a long-standing co-location and partnership with Berkshire Housing Development Corporation, where we share and administer the Housing Consumer Education Center, which allows us to provide a continuum of housing services, everything from homelessness prevention and resolution services to home ownership options. So it's a very important program, and especially in the current environment we're in, we know that disproportionately housing is impacted and housing stability has been impacted. And I would just also ask that we view, when we talk about housing today, I know we're going to be looking at it through the lens of COVID, but I just want to remind folks, and I know most of the folks on this meeting, participating in this meeting know this already, but the COVID pandemic just exacerbated existing, what I would consider to be an existing economic structural crisis. And that, again, impacted housing stability across the communities in Berkshire County. The update I want to briefly provide is that we are partnering with the city of Pittsfield to administer a financial assistance programs, and it's funded through, under the CARES Act, through the CDBG CV funds and through CPA funds, and it's roughly a little under $200,000 that's going to go to direct financial assistance. It will be available to households starting in July, up to 100% of median household income, depending on the program. And I just want to, again, commend the city. They really stepped up. They understand the crisis that we're facing, and they're investing these funds to really help us mitigate some of those challenges. And the way that folks will be able to access these services or these resources is the same way they would access any of our services, which is through our shared HCEC with Berkshire Housing Development Corporation. We share a screening and assessment center that can be accessed through a link at either of our websites. And again, I can put that up there in the chat, but that is the probably the easiest way to access those resources, as well as the full suite of services, which include a wide range of housing counseling, legal counseling, mediation, and case management programs. So I'm going to stop because I know we are short on time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad. And again, apologies for that interruption, and really thankful both for you sharing your thoughts, but also the work that you guys are doing at your organization. Really appreciate it. So next we're going to go to Carolyn from the Central Berkshire Habitat for Humanity. Carolyn, if you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I'm from Central Berkshire Habitat, and we're building 6 units of affordable home ownership right now. We have 36 units of affordable home ownership. I'm glad to say through this COVID-19, our homeowners have not been impacted as many as the data shows, so I'm happy about that. And we're also doing a lot of work with neighborhood revitalization and workforce development, because we recognize that residents living in this neighborhood could gain a career that would actually be one that they could raise a family on if they went into construction. So we have a workforce development program, and we're doing a lot of work in helping administer neighbor-to-neighbor funds for the COVID-19 as well, and just really making community care calls to find out what's going on with folks in the neighborhoods and across the city, because everybody's feeling so isolated.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I really appreciate it as well. Thank you for taking the time to share with us. So next we're going to go to Alyssa Costa. Alyssa is from the Berkshire Bridges Working Cities. Alyssa, if you could unmute yourself, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. So Berkshire Bridges has been working over the last 3 years to really build community engagement and involvement in the vision, similar and aligned with what Central Berkshire Habitat is doing in the neighborhoods. And we deploy what we call community navigators in the neighborhoods to connect with residents who are struggling and work with connecting them to available resources that they may not be aware of or able to easily access. So we will connect them to the program that Brad was talking about and to other opportunities, the neighbor to neighbor funds, to help them meet their daily living expenses and ease some of the burden of what's going on. So that's sort of the biggest thing that we're doing to connect folks to resources, and then just helping center the work on that community and lifting their voices.
Thank you, Alyssa. I really appreciate that as well. And lastly, we have, I can't tell if you're in the meeting, but Elton, are you on the call somewhere? Elton Ogden is from the Berkshire Housing Development Corporation. If you are, can you unmute yourself and share? May not have made it in. If you're on the phone and you're trying to unmute yourself, if you press *6, you will be able to speak. So we'll give you just another minute. If there's someone else from the Berkshire Housing Development Corporation who wanted to speak in his absence, please feel free. Okay.
I can fill in a little bit.
Brad, great. Thank you, Brad. We'll give you double duty here. Thank you.
So obviously we would partner with them on the HCEC. They are also the raft provider for the community and the home base provider. So they have the largest pool of financial resources for renters and homeowners. They are probably the top developer in the county, and they can't list them specifically right now, but I know they have at least a half dozen affordable housing developments under development right now across the county. So they're actively involved, and they also partner with CHAPA on a lot of different initiatives as well.
Thank you so much, Brad, for stepping in, and thank you for sharing. Glad to hear all of that work is continuing, even if Elton wasn't even able to make it onto the phone. And I just want to thank all of our regional co-hosts. You know, CHAPA, we work statewide throughout the Commonwealth, but it really is critical to have voices that are doing the work locally and regionally. That's why we really value these co-hosts here today. So I'm going to go back to sharing our screens and proceed with the presentation. So next up, we're going to hear from Abidnia Curve. She is from our policy team at CHAPA, and she's going to give us some state policy updates. Abi, go ahead.
Thanks, Dana. I'm Abi Gurve, and I want to thank you all for joining in this afternoon. As we work on, responding to the needs of, in this COVID crisis for affordable housing, we have had to shift our priorities from what we had before to, addressing the immediate needs. And with that, I would just like to give an overview of some of the policies and things that we have been working on, and the efforts that we have been taking to ensure that during this time, people have a safe place to call home, and ensure that people are able to stay healthy. And as I go into the priorities, I just wanted to, highlight that we always knew that housing is health, but this crisis has highlighted that point so strongly that it has been helpful in that sense to drive this forward and really get the spotlight on housing and affordable housing especially. With that, one of our approaches to ensuring housing stability is to ensure equitable policies. We have tried to ensure that we are addressing not just tenants, but homeowners, landlords, and sort of ensuring that the entire housing ecosystem is stable through this crisis and is able to, get out of it with as much less harm as possible. And going forward, next slide. we have worked on a couple of priorities, but I would just like to highlight a couple of them that is our focus right now. And one of them is RAF, the Residential Assistance for Families in Transition. And many speakers have highlighted this before, that as people are losing incomes, this is really a critical program to ensure there is some housing assistance for people or households who need them. As we come near to the end of eviction moratorium, we do expect that there can be a huge wave of evictions that can come across if we do not provide enough housing assistance. And so we have been advocating for a 50 million appropriation for RAFT, expansion of RAFT. Currently, it is the benefit is $4,000 for a household, and we are trying to increase it up to 10,000, and also expand the access beyond 50% AMI. You know that DHCD has been planning some efforts on this, and at the same time increase some funding for the HCECs, which are sort of the frontline agencies taking these calls and applications. And one breaking news, if I can share, which we got to know just recently, is that the supplemental budget that the governor had filed does have some funding, 20 million funding proposed on the House Ways and Means side for RAFT, and has sort of proposed the increase in cap to 10,000, and some, not 6 million, but 1.5 million funding for HCEC. So we are really excited about that, and we are going to advocate for making sure that this sort of passes the legislature, and that we do have the funding for RAFT available. If not the entire 50 million, we are good to start with the 20 million that is proposed. So that is something that we just recently heard, and I'm happy to share it on this meeting. Also, we are trying to work, one of the things as we are looking at increasing resources for housing is how can we leverage the resources that we already have through the federal funds. And CHAPA has been working on coordinating these federal resources to make sure that we can leverage them for the housing needs, and have some transparency around them and how they are used, and in which programs they are diverted to. And so if we can match the needs, because with the state revenues going down, we definitely will be relying a lot on the federal funds for these programs. And so one of our focuses is to work on how we are going to divert these federal funds to these programs. I'll talk about it going forward a little bit. One legislation that we have also been pushing for, advocating for at this time, is the right to counsel. This was already in the works before COVID, but especially with potentially so many eviction cases going to court, we are advocating for the right to counsel legislation, which would provide full legal representations for tenants and owners at a certain income level. And so this is a smaller pilot program, but it would be really helpful as we come to the end of the moratorium. And not to lose our eyes on the housing choice legislation, which would lower the threshold for some of the zoning decisions on the town level. We are also trying to push forward that legislation, not taking our eyes off it, because as we have so many conversations going around racial equity, it has been helpful to sort of push that conversation forward in terms that if you care about racial equity, then housing equity is also something you should care about. And this is one of the ways to sort of ensure that, to make sure that through housing choice, it would open up communities that have been closed for people with lower incomes and other races to enter that community through affordable housing. And so that is something we have been working on. On the budget side, we do have a lot going on as well. With the current situation, we're not sure how the budget is going to be looking for FY 2021, but through the supplemental budget, we were advocating for 13.5 million for the public housing authorities and some for the homeless shelters. And we are glad that it also, the budget that came out has also seen RAFT, in it. We are also at the same time trying to make sure that programs like MRVP, the Mass Rental Voucher Program, which is a state program, and AHVP are sort of not cut. They are not cut in funding, because we want to ensure that in this crisis, that these programs will be even more critical for for households to maintain the stable housing. And so we are making sure that a whole host of priorities that we have, we are fighting for those. And with that, we are also, I mean, just to highlight another priority of ours is the 5.8 million for housing for people experiencing homelessness, who have specific needs, and a permanent supportive housing can be a really great program for that. And I'm happy to report that even that was included in the sub-budget put out by the House Ways and Means. So there's a lot going on, a lot of, we are having some, progress in terms of getting these resources, but a lot more advocacy is needed, and I'll speak to that. But I'll let Ryan speak more of the federal side on for CHAPA priorities.
Perfect. Thank you, Abi. So I'm Ryan Dominguez, Policy Analyst for CHAPA, and I help to coordinate CHAPA's federal policy work. And I do that through the New England Housing Network, which is a broad coalition of affordable housing organizations in each of the New England states. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been advocating down in DC for additional housing and homelessness resources to be included in the CARES Act as well as the House's HEROES Act. And we'll continue to do so as we try to fight for more housing and homelessness relief in any kind of next stimulus package that comes out of the federal government. On the state level, we've been focused a lot on the funding from the CARES Act and making sure that those allocations are going towards communities that need it, and specifically for housing and homelessness. And we've been focused on 3 sources of funding from the CARES Act. The first is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF. The second is the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG. And lastly is the Emergency Solution Grants, or ESG. To give you a little bit of an overview, CRF is the biggest pool of money that we've received from the CARES Act, and that included $2.7 billion for the state of Massachusetts. And approximately 25% of that funding has gone directly to cities and towns across the Commonwealth for a total of $502 million. So I've highlighted here a few of your local municipalities that has received CRF funding, including Pittsfield, which received around $3.7 million for CRF. North Adams received $1.1 million, and Adams received $712,000. CRF has been used by other states for things like rental assistance, mortgage assistance, as well as helping to finance gaps in affordable housing development. And then moving on, the Community Development Block Grant is the second source of funding we've been focused on. And Massachusetts received around $86 million for CDBG. CDBG can be used for things like 3 months of rental assistance, as well as for funding housing counseling programs. And to highlight a local municipality, Pittsfield received around $800,000 for its CDBG fund. And then lastly, there's the Emergency Solutions Grants, or ESG, which can be used for funding shelter costs as well as rapid rehousing. And the Commonwealth received around $104 million for this. Before I let Abi talk a little bit about what you can do now, I'll just say from the federal perspective, it would be very helpful if you as local advocates go to your local municipalities and contact your local officials to really try to get into the conversation about how these funds are going to be allocated. Really try to push for a public process, some type of public comment period, so that you can tell them that we really need to prioritize housing and homelessness for these federal dollars, because, as Abi had mentioned previously, we're going to have a lot of revenue shortfalls, and this might be our only chance to really give long-term funding and relief towards housing and homelessness. And with that said, I'll kick it back to Abi.
Thanks, Ryan. And there's a lot that you can do, from your side to advocate for these policies. First is contact your state legislator and ask them to, help support expansion of RAFT. We have gotten some money in the Ways and Means proposed sub-budget, and thanks, Brad, for clarifying that the sub-budget is for FY 2020, and we are, which can be carried on to FY 2021. But we are still sort of, trying to push for as much money for RAFT, because we are not even sure when the moratorium ends, what is going to be the spike. And so the more money that comes in for RAFT, the more helpful it will be for stabilizing households. So if you can contact your state legislator and ask them to expand RAFT and CEC's funding, that would be great. As Ryan pointed out, it would be really helpful on the local level. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of money there, and we are not sure how many of local organizations even have and some idea or engagement with the town government to understand how are these funds being distributed. And we have, that's why, come out with, you know, a sample letter that you can use to sort of reach out to your local municipal officials and ask them to sort of just be engaged and have a public process for deciding how these funds are getting distributed. And I would share that link right now. You can also join CHAPA committees. We have one of the things that we, you know, do a lot is sort of get together stakeholders and members and, you know, other voices to shape these priorities and make sure the policy solutions that we're advocating are really something that are comprehensive, and make sure that we are pushing equitable policies. So if you want to join our committees, which are specifically focused around state budget, housing stability and economic mobility for homelessness prevention, public housing and rental assistance. So we have different committees that you can join, be a part of, and with Zoom it has become even easier to be a part of them, and to sort of make sure that we hear more voices and more input, and you know, our policies that we advocate for are really comprehensive and work for everyone. So it would be great if you can do that and just be plugged into the conversation to get to know these updates and to advocate at the right time. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Dana.
Thank you, Abhi and Ryan, for all of your updates. And for folks in the chat, both of them are sharing links. I will also direct you to our website. This, as I said, is our 4th regional meeting, and many of these links and resources are already up on our website. So don't feel like you have to be taking all of this in and furiously taking notes. Another tip is at the end, if you want to share the, if you want to save the chat function, you can go down to the bottom right next to where it says file. There's 3 dots. If you click on that, it will give you the option to save the chat. So you can save all of those links so that you're not furiously trying to write those all down right now. But you can also find those all on our website. I do see someone had a question in here. Someone says, as I rearrange my living room into a bedroom for my autistic adult son, how does CHAPA define experiencing homelessness? Abhi, do you want to take that that question now, or should we wait until we get into the conversation?
I can speak briefly to that. I think defining, I mean, it's not for us to define what is homelessness. We do have certain characteristics like, below 30% AMI, 50% AMI, but anybody who is in need of any sort of housing assistance needs to access these programs, and we are just ensuring that there are resources available so that when people do reach out for these programs, you know, they are able to get that assistance. And I mean, it's hard to categorize anything as, you know, or any family as experiencing homelessness from our side. I would say it's a very different story for any family who is experiencing any sort of hardship in, you know, having a space and a safe space to call home. So that's why our focus is on ensuring that these resources are available for any sort of assistance any household needs.
Thank you, Abhi. I appreciate it. All right, so we'll move on to our next section, and I'm going to ask Whitney Demetrius to unmute herself and talk to us a little bit about our Municipal Engagement Initiative.
Thanks, Dana. So the Municipal Engagement Initiative started back in 2018, so just a few years here. And so the main objective is really building support for affordable housing production across the Commonwealth. And so we do that in various different local strategies, trying to pull together a coalition of folks where Abhi sort of talked about what you can do now personally. We do also understand that on the local level, you know, things can happen when there's a local advocacy group, right, that is for affordable housing in the community. So we understand that the local support can really make or break new housing development. And so wouldn't it be great if there was a local housing group in your community that could strategize around supporting efforts in each community to build a culture that welcomes housing, specifically affordable housing, bolsters efforts to expand housing opportunities for all. right? For all people, right? Housing that is safe, that is accessible, that is healthy, that's sustainable, right? For all people, I think alluding back to the question that was posed in the chat. And then growing the number of people who are supporting housing production in each community, thinking about it in various ways, right? So not just the housing folks, but folks who are the environmentalists, social services, the churches and schools, all folks who have different interests, but how those interests overlap with housing, because we really do see that as the driving factor to many of those other conversations, right? And so our effort is really to look at each community as different, and understanding that each community is unique. But so our strategies might be different in terms of our starting point, right? The level of folks who are expertise, the size, the local government are all different. And so our approach is different in each of those communities. But the idea is really to just get started. Where do I go? Where do we go from here to try to get together a group? Well, one thing you would do is just identify those core folks who are in your community, who are already sort of driving many of those conversations. Get them together to start then thinking further about who are the partners, right? Is it the community health centers, the hospitals, the various civic groups? Who are the additional partners to bring to the table to really be thinking about this? The business leaders, etc. Begin having those conversations, right? Have those one-on-ones. Pull data together locally to sort of drive those conversations. Get started, right? Have a launch event. Have a launch meeting virtually, right? And get those folks together to begin thinking about forward pacing. What does it look like in our community if we do nothing around taking a stand for affordable housing in our community? What we have done, as you'll see at the bottom here of the slide, is we have on our website a MEI Light Toolkit to sort of get you started, right? What does the first meeting for an agenda look like? How do I start thinking outside of the box of the same 10 people who are engaged in my community to sort of expand upon who the stakeholders are in my community? How do I think outside the box of how I even define who a stakeholder is? How do I think about what voices are not at the table, the gaps in folks who are not being served, and really optimizing the moment that we're in terms of growth and action, and thinking about how folks are engaged and where around these various crises that we're in, be it health, be it housing, be it economics, be it social, racial inequities, etc. And so optimizing the moment to really get started. So again, that toolkit is on our website to kind of guide folks if they're interested. Dana and I are here to answer any questions that you may have, to expand upon the work you might want to do locally. But some of our groups have done forums to educate the public. They have advocated for inclusionary zoning. They have, successfully put together questionnaires for candidates locally in their communities. So many things that you can be doing to make impact. And so we're here and happy to answer questions and to guide you through some of this. So thanks, Dana.
Thank you, Whitney. And as Whitney said, we're always available to talk. We are in 9 communities for our Municipal Engagement Initiative. We've been in 2 communities for our Municipal Engagement Initiative Light, and we're happy to come and talk to anyone about getting started on this work. So I want to give you just a little bit of data and context. Whitney gave you a brief taste of this at the beginning during the poll that you all took, but just to weight our discussion in some of the topics that we're all thinking about right now. So as you can see here, we're looking at one of the charts from the COVID Community Data Lab. And as you can see here, it's a chart that shows cities with more frontline workers have higher COVID rates. So I want to just say, it sounds like there are lower rates of COVID in the Berkshires than in some of the other parts of Massachusetts. I do want to acknowledge that. But when we're thinking about where there might be higher rates, it is this data source, the COVID Community Data Lab, is a great resource. You can dig into a lot of things around equity, housing, economic development. It's really, really wonderful. So this is just a piece of it that I pulled for you. I wanted to raise up Pittsfield as one of the communities that is in your region. Pittsfield has a case rate of 39 cases per 10,000 residents as of June 3rd. Overcrowding of 1%. Overcrowding has been shown to be correlated with higher COVID rates, as has residents who are frontline workers, and that's what you see here. Pittsfield has 46 of Pittsfield residents are frontline workers, and so that's where the concern might be. People who have not been able to stay home, who have not been able to socially isolate despite the recommendations. They've been going out and doing work despite that. Pittsfield has 16% residents of color. There is a correlation between residents of color and higher rates of COVID, and 15% of households in Pittsfield are in poverty. So again, these are all things, when we're thinking about who is being impacted the most in this pandemic, those are some of the things to be thinking about and where we should be targeting our resources. And if you go into this, this source, Whitney will be sharing all of these sources with you. I believe she did at the beginning of the call as well. You'll be able to dig into some of the other communities in your region. So from that same source, you'll notice that Whitney said at the beginning, 22% of households were unable to make their housing payments. But if we dig in a little bit deeper, lower income households are less likely to have made those full May housing payments. So going back to Pittsfield, if 15% of households are in poverty, they are going to be much more likely to have been unable to make their full housing payment. And maybe they made a partial payment, but it's not enough. They're going to need that immediate rental assistance now. They might need it in the future as well. And thinking going forward, I think this is where we all are right now, is thinking about what's going to happen over the next few months. Less than half of those surveyed, both renters and homeowners, feel that they could afford their current housing costs for the next 3 months. So that's concerning to us, that maybe we've helped people stay in their homes, or we've kept them knowing right now how critical having a roof over your head is, but are they going to be able to maintain that? This is a report from MAPC on the COVID-19 layoff and housing gaps. They have an original report and some updates, so please take a look at that. But just to share a couple of things with you when we're talking about the scale of this problem, they do not have this broken down by region or by municipality, but you can sense it's going to be across the Commonwealth. Even with expanded CARES Act unemployment benefits, there's 7,800 renter households and 7,700 owner households who still are having trouble paying for their basic needs. And that results in about 13.8 million monthly needed in funds to keep their current on their rent or mortgage. So it's a huge number. And looking again, thinking about those households who felt they wouldn't be able to afford their housing costs over the next 3 months, if these same workers are still unable to work in August, even after the expanded CARES Act unemployment benefits end, there's going to be a lot more people in the same situation. They estimate the average monthly assistance needed would be $935 per renter household and $1,290 per owner household, and a statewide gap of $195 million. So B mentioned some of the RAFT funds that have been set aside for this, but there are a lot of needs coming down the pike. And I appreciate Brad is sharing some here that Berkshire County was ranked 12th worst out of 14 counties on public health indicators, places people at much greater risk during the pandemic. Absolutely. Those are the kinds of things that we're concerned about. So people who were already struggling prior to the pandemic are going to be the people who are struggling even more in this moment. So I do want to open it up. Excuse me, I hopped right past it. I do want to open it up for discussion, but wanted to share a couple of things that we've been thinking about at CHAPA, and that I know our regional co-hosts have been thinking about at their organizations. One is this emergency rental assistance programs. Where are they? Who are they reaching? And what happens after the moratoriums are lifted and unemployment ends? We are very lucky in Massachusetts right now to have an eviction and mortgage moratorium. It's keeping people housed. There are still people who are facing eviction or maybe aren't safely housed or fall through the cracks of who's covered by those moratoriums. But it's been able to stem the tide of people being pushed out of their homes. But when that moratorium lifts, who are we going to be able to assist, and how are we going to be able to do that? Whitney's shared in the chat a list of emergency rental assistance programs that we have been able to gather through a survey with DHCD and MHP. So you can take a look at that and see where there might be local emergency assistance programs in your community. Beyond having those programs out there, the ability for people to access those funds is concerning to us. So are there language barriers? Are there barriers for people getting forms online or submitting them online? Do they know that they're eligible? One of the things that keeps coming up is people are saying, you know, I don't think I'm eligible for housing assistance. Well, maybe you weren't last year, but right now in this moment, you've lost income or you've had a loss of income from COVID-19. That might make you eligible. So really making sure that people understand that those funds are out there and that they can get to them, and thinking about all of the populations that are most at risk of COVID-19 and most at risk of housing instability in this moment. How do we make sure that the information gets to them so that they can take advantage of those programs? The tourist industry, this was something that came up when we were talking with the folks in the Berkshires. You know, you have a really robust tourist industry, especially in the summer. And what are the impacts on your economy if people aren't traveling, if they're not visiting museums, if they're not coming to all of the great places that you have to offer? It's still unknown exactly what the impact of that will be, but we know there will be an impact. It was also noted to me that there's a prevalence of really small property owners. So there's not a lot of large property owners with a lot of units in their portfolio. Many of them are owners that own a 3-family or a 2-family or a few scattered here and there. And the loss of rent for those property owners is felt even harder because they may not have the reserves to fall back on. So thinking about that, making sure that rent is getting paid so that the owners who are maintaining that housing can continue to do so. There's also a prevalence of small employers. I think the stat that was shared with me was that 85% of employers in the region have 10 or fewer employees. So again, when businesses close or when they have to cut back on their employment, that's going to have a really large impact on your industries and your economy, and therefore people's ability to pay for housing. We are always thinking about housing as healthcare at CHAPA, but in this moment, even more so. And I don't think I need to say much more on that other than the biggest vaccine against COVID-19 is a safe, affordable home that you can stay in at this moment. And we know that that's not effective for everyone right now because they don't have that ability. And lastly, in this moment of police brutality and racial justice, we're always thinking about that as well. So where do we need to step up for racial equity? Is it in zoning? Is it in making more housing affordable for people? Is it making our communities more welcoming? We know that housing and zoning, fair housing, all have a role to play in that, and we want to make sure that we raise that up. I believe there was a question here, and I'm going to right now open it up for discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but simply to say these are the kinds of questions that we are grappling with and that we want to hear from you on. You know, where do we go from here, and what are the top concerns that you're facing? Are those state and federal resources that Abhi and Ryan talked about, are they actually filling the gaps that you are seeing in your community, or are there other resources needed? What are the policies or sources of funds that would solve those issues? And beyond that, what are you working on? We really just want to open it up to you. So we've got a decent amount of time. I think we've got a small enough group here right now that I'm not going to send us into breakout discussion groups. I'm just going to open it up. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen. We're going to go back to the gallery view. So why don't we start? I saw a couple of questions at the beginning, and I'll start just by calling on folks, and then we can go from there. So Elliot had mentioned that questioning whether banks have become more flexible regarding debt to income ratios that block folks from refinancing or purchasing home. Elliot, do you want to say any more on that question?
Hi. Let me just let you see me too, I think. There we go. Hi, there's the living room I need to rearrange for my son. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I just find that I just recently have been laid off, and I'm looking at these fabulous mortgage rates, and it's very discouraging that I can't lower my own mortgage rate because I can't follow the rules with the debt to income ratios. And I'm wondering, with this crisis, if credit worthiness might be able to allow a bank to talk to me about a mortgage refinance. And I also, mostly, I feel like I'm not alone. I would want to share that information.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that situation. I don't know if anyone is able to speak to that. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I do know that there's the ability to defer your mortgage payments to the end of your mortgage, but regarding refinancing, I don't have that answer, but what I can do is get back to you unless someone else on the phone has anything to add to that.
I can add to it a little bit. I don't, the ratios at this point, they're not changing. So yeah. I understand what you want to do, and that makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, when a lot of times the only way you can get them to move on things like that, which is essentially doing some sort of modification, is you have to be in distress, which is kind of unfortunate because that's not where you want to be. You're trying to avoid that. But again, you could contact our organization, Berkshire County Regional Housing Authority, and we could at least like explore what might be out there. We have a foreclosure prevention counselor, and he has deep knowledge of all the programs that are out there. It doesn't mean that there's a magic wand, and I don't think those ratios, especially in the current economic climate, are going to change that much, but I think we should look at it. So I would encourage you to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a great reminder, Brad, that there are foreclosure counselors throughout the Commonwealth. If you go to CHAPA's website, I should have mentioned at the beginning that we have 2 pages on our website that are dedicated to COVID-19. One is really policies and updates that might be helpful for at the organizational level. And one is really for folks who are searching for assistance in this moment. So you could find foreclosure counselors there, folks helping with rental assistance, legal assistance, food assistance, and more. So thank you for that. So we had a question here or a comment from Paul Shack that clients are having trouble with remote access. Paul, do you want to say more on that? How folks are able to apply for assistance if they can't do it in person?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen it across the spectrum. So, I mean, I've been involved, even though there's an eviction moratorium, there's still actually a lot of court cases that are being brought, with emergency types of cases. And I've had several Zoom hearings where I've had some of them that have worked out okay, but others where my client wasn't able to get to access Zoom with video, and the court wasn't happy about that because they want to be able to see the witness and I'm trying to emphasize to the providers that it's really not in this case the litigant or a witness or a client's responsibility to figure out how to access a program if the reason why they can't access it is because the program is just closed to them. They can't just walk in the door. So I think it's really the burden should be on the court or the agency to make sure that people have this as much of the same type of access as they had before. I mean, in this particular context, I was just dealing with a client who was trying to apply for assistance for financial assistance through Berkshire Housing, was told to do it online. She can't get on it on her phone. She was told to download and print an application. She can't do that. So, well, I guess they'll mail her something. She can maybe mail it back, so then we're talking about weeks of delay, because she can't just have a face-to-face meeting. So, I know people are trying their best, but, there has to be a real, I think, there has to be a, acknowledgement that there really are significant barriers for a lot of people that either don't have the technology or just don't know how to use it.
Yeah, and as we just saw with it, we're all having can have trouble with our audio. I think I just had a little bit with mine. So thank you for raising that. And I think for those who are administering funds, that's important, but also for us at CHAPA as we're advocating for more funds, making sure that those funds are available and people can reach those resources. June, you had said something about inconsistencies with RAF grants, so that, you know, people who maybe had lost their job pre-COVID are having trouble getting access to funds because it's not COVID related. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I just came from a housing meeting with our staff who are kind of frustrated because in addition to administering rental assistance, which is capped, we're referring people to RAFT and to other programs, and we're having to refer them more than once. So they'll get turned down, and then we'll send in an advocate, and then they can get assistance. And some of them were turned down because their unemployment was not COVID related. You know, one man was laid off just prior to COVID, but COVID is the reason he can't get another job because none of the factories are hiring. And so we're trying, I mean, I'm seeing that the limit is lifted and the amounts are higher. And so we're a little frustrated with trying to get everybody assistance.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone on the call want to speak to that? Brad, I see you've unmuted yourself. Are you ready to go?
I don't know if anyone is here from Berkshire Housing. We don't administer the program, but I have a lot of familiarity.
Speak up, Brad, because I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. I have a lot of familiarity with the program, and I can tell you that it's been a bit dynamic, the eligibility, but they have broadened it significantly. DHCD has broadened it significantly. And it's a very loose and broad standard in terms of connecting it to the pandemic for eligibility. So I would encourage you, and I know it's a drag when you have to have people reapply, you can do that, but additionally, I would encourage you, and they're very receptive to this, schedule a meeting with folks from Berkshire Housing, either Lisa Wright or Jane Pixley or Elton, and just explain that you think it's more not just an individual case issue, but maybe a systemic interpretation issue. I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of those kind of issues. I feel like they do understand it, but if that's not what you're experiencing, it's important for you to convey that to them in a way that goes beyond doing it on a case-by-case basis.
That's great. Thank you, Brad. And I think also, you know, from CHAPA's perspective, we can take that back to our RAFT advocacy to see if that's something that needs to be addressed as well. Brad had shared in the chat, you know, that when I was talking about the local tourist industry, that 51% of Berkshire County households are at or below 80% of the median household income, and many of these are employed in service sector jobs, which are directly linked to tourism. So again, thinking about, you know, maybe you lost your job and you're trying to get rehired, but if there's not a market for this tourist industry right now, how are you going to get that that new job? So making that connection for folks is important. So I see, Tanya, you had a question, and you had said, oh, so for folks who need help doing applications online, Tanya, can you speak any more to the process for how folks can do that if they're unable to access the materials online?
Yes, absolutely. In addition to being the finance manager at Habitat for Humanity, I am also a community navigator working with Alyssa Costa through Berkshire Bridges Working Cities. And what we do is we reach out to people that are in the community, see if they have the access that they need to fill out these applications for RAFT, for SNAP benefits, if they need assistance activating their PEBT cards to get those benefits, as well as many other things. Also, unemployment has been a huge thing, assisting people to apply for that. So as a community navigator, we reach out to them, get their contact information, and then we just fill out the application for them. We input whether they have an email address that they can receive correspondence from, and if they don't, we put in our own email addresses so that we can still correspond with those agencies and let them know where they're at in the process and if they need any more follow-up information to get those benefits activated for them. So if anybody is seeing that they have clients or they know people that do not have the internet access to fill out these applications, but they need it done, I included my email in the chat, and they are more than welcome to reach out to me and pass their contact information over, and I can help them fill these applications out.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And for those who are on the phone and can't view the chat, the email is accounting@berkshirehabitat.org. I really appreciate you sharing that, but also the work that you're doing to make sure people have access to those resources. And Elizabeth Costley had also shared in Williamstown that you printed out the applications, are sharing them at local post offices, and have hard copies at the food pantries. Anything else you want to add on that, Elizabeth, before I open up to more questions? Nope. Oh, you're muted, Elizabeth, if you're trying to speak. There you go.
We've had good luck with the post office, especially. It's one of the few places that was open for a while. Now things are opening up, but you know, many people picked up applications there.
Great, thank you. And Whitney and I, in our work with a lot of local communities, have seen some other great ways that people are getting the word out. So one that I think is really wonderful is a lot of the schools are doing food pickups. So all of the students who are eligible for free school lunches or breakfast programs, many of them expanded it to all of their students, not just those who are eligible. They're putting information about housing assistance and other resources into those packages. Also for folks who are working with seniors and veterans who are doing delivery of groceries, they're putting materials right into those packets about what people might be eligible for, so that we're getting the information out to them rather than waiting for them to come to us. And Whitney has been using this phrase, and we've been hearing it elsewhere, that, you know, no door is the wrong door. So we've just been, you know, many people are just making sure that if someone reaches out to them, they get them over to Tanya, who will be able to help them actually fill out that form. So thank you. So I'll open it up. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but you know, for folks who are on the phone, if you want to speak up, you can hit *6. But for the rest of you, I'd love to hear, you know, what are some of the other concerns you're having? Are you seeing additional gaps? We're always wanting to think about, you know, how do we continue to address COVID-19 or address housing beyond COVID-19? We, in the Municipal Engagement Initiative, do a lot of work around making the case for affordable housing. So we don't want to lose sight of the need for more housing, more permitting, more development to meet the needs, even as we are in the midst of this pandemic. So I'd love to hear from other folks. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. Carolyn, go for it.
So in administering the Neighbor to Neighbor program, we found that by talking to the landlords, we were also able to find out who was already starting to slide into trouble, so that we were able to connect Tanya with them to do budgeting, also to let them know about the programs that Berkshire Housing has, and to help them get started on that, because many of them have never ever had to access anything. And it's a very new world for them, and it's very difficult for them to change their thinking about, oh my gosh, I have to apply. So we thought that that has been good. The other thing that we're about to embark on is a survey, and Alyssa can talk a little bit more about that, on how our Spanish-speaking residents, how they feel that they have been served during this time period, so that we get a little bit more data going into whatever is to come. Alyssa, can you talk more about that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on. You know, when COVID first hit, we noticed that the undocumented community was hit the hardest. I'm sure everyone else saw that too, and how difficult it was for them to access resources. So we've been doing a lot of extra outreach and managing things, because they're not eligible for all of the programs. But then we're also finding that there's, you know, Berkshire County does not have a lot of Spanish-speaking providers, and so folks are having some challenges communicating and receiving services and understanding who is eligible and who is not for different programs. And sometimes it comes across, folks are reporting that they're not being served fairly by some of the organizations. And rather than see it as a one organization or a two organization problem, we want to lift those voices up. So we're developing a survey that would be, in partnership with some of our Hispanic-led organizations to find out folks' experiences with getting services during COVID-19, so that we can hear from them what they're experiencing, and that we might be able to address it as a system-wide issue in making sure that folks are getting the services that they need.
Thank you, Alyssa. I really appreciate that. I think on the topic of undocumented immigrants, one of the things we've been hearing is, even if folks are eligible for programs like RAFT, which they are, there's a fear that goes along with applying for programs when you're not fully aware of what the potential impacts of it might be. And so having someone speaking your language and from a trusted organization is so critical to making sure people have access to those resources. I see a question here. Oh, and thank you, Alyssa, for encouraging folks to fill out the census. Yes. I know that so many of the same organizations who are doing COVID-19 response are the same who are working on census reporting, and I know you guys are pulled in multiple directions, but all of these funds depend on accurate reporting and bringing that money into communities that really do deserve it. So we have a question here about, on the topic of non-COVID, the landscape for existing programs, level funding. Is there, Abi, I think you spoke to that a little bit, and also any word on 9% awards. Abi, do you have any answers you can share on that?
So in terms of the programs, I mean, the budget for 2021 is a really, nobody knows what's going to happen with that. There are certain things the state is waiting on just how those federal funds are going to be allocated. But from what we are hearing is they are going to either have a monthly or a quarterly budget, and it looks more like monthly at this point. And that may be either just a continuation of or the same level funding from FY 2020 for maybe the first or the second month, and then going forward, depending on how the revenue is and what is the money left over from the federal funds, they may have a new budget. But it's all, we don't have a definite answer right now. I can get back to you on the 9% after checking, but in terms of level funding, that's what we are fighting for, to make sure that there are at least no cuts, if not an increased funding.
Thank you, Abi. So I think, June, did you have your hand raised, or you were unmuting? Go for it.
I just wanted to say, one of the challenges that we're having right now in Berkshire County, most of our towns are town meeting towns, and the town meetings are haphazardly scheduled, poorly attended, difficult to present at, and the CPA final decisions are made there. So it's so far not impossible, but it's been really challenging.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, I believe there is a webinar from MAPC that might be interesting on that topic, about how folks are doing permitting in this moment, but it is something that's come up over and over. And beyond the kind of the technical issues of how do you get this stuff done, we have also heard in many communities that they're experiencing opposition in this moment, saying, we shouldn't be focusing on changes to our zoning, or we shouldn't be focusing on new housing when we're in the midst of this crisis. And it's been used a bit as a response to not making progress on some of those local things. Thank you, Jenna, just shared the webinar in the chat. I appreciate that. But how do we keep our focus on all of these things we knew? Those of us who have been working in this field for a long time know there were many needs prior to COVID-19. How do we keep moving all of that forward? So I don't have any, clear answers for you. I do know that some communities have found an easier way to do it. Carolyn, you were mentioning some town meeting is happening socially distanced outside. It's a challenge that we are grappling with on top of all of the other challenges that we have. So thank you for raising that, June. Anyone else have any ideas to share on that? No. Okay. I see here that there's a comment as well that the Berkshire Sanctuary Network has asked how to assist folks with immigrant status issues. Many seek shared housing arrangements, and not sure which organizations are gathering lists of shared housing options. Thanks for sharing that, Elliot. Do you want to say anything more on that? Okay, thank you for sharing. Other folks, anyone on the phone, if you hit *6, you can speak. Or any other things that you're grappling with that you've been, wanting to see happen in your community.
This is Brad. I would be, again, I bring this up annually, and so it still isn't totally resolved. And that's the idea of we have an older housing stock across Berkshire County, one that needs a significant amount of investment and really places a number of households in very challenging circumstances. Probably disproportionately impacts Black and brown people. So it's something that really needs some focus. And so we know there's a CDBG program, but it's just not adequate enough relative to the resources that are available to address this problem. And I've suggested, and I'm not the only one, that we need like an expansion of that, a rehab type program such as the CDBG program. I think it's so important, especially for the gateway communities like Pittsfield, as well as a number of the other communities in Berkshire County that primarily have a housing stock that was built before the 1950s. So I'm hopeful that doesn't, I know we're hyper focused on the current crisis, but I would hate to see us forget about that, and I hope we can continue to push through on that type of initiative.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate you raising that. And I think it is still relevant even in the framework of the pandemic, that, having a roof over your head is only good if that roof itself is safe and secure and healthy. We're spending more and more time in our homes. If it's not a safe and healthy place to be, that adds to that. And it also, you raise the issue of that impacting Black and brown people more than white people. And again, that being part of all of these discussions that we're having, it is a racial equity issue, it is a health issue, it is a accessible housing issue. So thank you for raising that. Anyone else?
I would just like to add one thing to Brad's point, that that as we are thinking about this whole crisis, I mean, it is one thing to make sure we are, using like CDBG money even for local rental assistance and things like that. But we are also trying to make sure that there is some funding left over to make sure there is more affordable housing development going forward. And as we move beyond maybe this year, that will be a significant need of like just creating more housing, which was already in short supply. And so thank you for bringing that up. It's something that we have been also trying to make sure that we have in our mind as we look forward.
Yes. So really high rental rates. Oh, go ahead, Alyssa, you wanted to speak on that?
Well, actually, it's probably more into what you were talking about. I'll let you say something first.
Okay, so I just am noticing a comment here from Carolyn that they've been seeing very high rental rates for immigrants that are renting rooms that exceed apartment rents. And very interesting, Carolyn, do you want to speak more on that? Is that, you think that's responding to the COVID crisis, or do you think that's a problem beyond that?
I think it's been a problem before the COVID-19 process. I think it's been exacerbated by COVID-19, and agencies are learning more about it because of the fact that many of those workers now have to go to a neighbor-to-neighbor program in order to ask for rent. So we had never done that work before, so we had never had any of that data, but we're now collecting it. And our staff actually looks at, similar houses, and it's like, how come, we might have one house that gets 3 applications. They're all renting different rooms, and all 3 of them are paying very high rates. And you look, it's a single family home. So, when we're looking at this, we're thinking about what can we do later with the data we're getting now in order to be able to inform and perhaps make some other kind of housing thoughts that we don't have right now. But it is very concerning to me that the amount of single room rentals are being charged. It's bad.
I will echo that with at least one other community that Whitney and I work in has raised this as an issue. And again, it is because they're getting applications from multiple people in rooms. So otherwise they wouldn't have known, but multiple people are coming to them and saying, I'm paying X, I'm paying $700 for this room, and that person's paying $700 for that room. And when they look at it, it's all in the same apartment. So thank you for raising that. as something that we are seeing in communities. I hadn't necessarily heard it as being specifically for immigrant communities in these other places, but thank you for raising that here as well. And it is a fair housing issue, Brad. Thank you as well for making that key point. Absolutely. And I think that's important in this moment to keep those points that, there's still fair housing in this moment. There's still protections. How are we making sure people get to the resources, the legal assistance that they need in this moment when they are really afraid of becoming homeless in the middle of a pandemic? I understand that. Alyssa, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, so I'm fairly new to the housing world, but I was looking over the website and the data and just wondering with this, this concern of the oncoming onslaught of evictions and the cost of this to our communities and to the Commonwealth. Is there any data that sort of summarizes the risk of how much that eviction process and the subsequent support that those households will need, is how much that's going to cost versus just paying their rent?
That's a great question.
It's pretty uneven.
That's a great question. I don't know of anything off the top of my head. Abhi, have you seen any numbers?
I do know that the Eviction Lab has been, they have launched a new, I think a program which is tracking COVID evictions during COVID, but the cost question is an interesting one. I'm not sure if I know any specific research which has been connecting cost of eviction, as a whole or even as a regional thing. But it's an interesting point and I will look into it. I know that as I talk about the right to counsel, they do have some stats on how much that might be costing. Let me link a fact sheet of the right to counsel legislation. I think they do have some stats around that. But thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Abhi. And actually someone shared in the chat, Matt Desmond has done a lot of work around the cost and consequences. Actually, on the National Low Income Housing Coalition call, I think that's happening right now. He's speaking.
Right. Yeah.
So thank you all for being here with us, but you can also, I'm sure that's recorded and can take a look at what they're doing at the Eviction Lab on that question. But I think that's a great question. We talk about that a lot in our municipal engagement initiative of, if we don't do what we need to do, what's the impact on us? If we don't build the housing that we need today, what will that look like for our communities in the future? And I think that you're asking the right question, Alyssa. If we don't keep people housed and spend the amount of money that's needed to do that, what are we spending in the future? But also not just the financial cost, but what's the emotional cost, the time cost for all of those families who lose that stability in their homes. So thank you for asking that.
Because I think in the end, we just have to get further upstream if we're going to resolve some of these issues. And we're catching people as they're falling instead of, going up the mountain. I don't know how else to put it, but.
Yep. I see some clapping from folks. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, the studies that they've had in the past have really focused on entry into the family shelter system and doing a cost benefit analysis of that, because that's something that's pretty concrete. And it's dramatic in terms of the cost of having someone go into family shelter, and we're a right to shelter state or quasi right in reality. So we can pull those numbers too. I know we've looked at them before, but it's a high cost. The question is whether whether we have the will to really look at those things as a community or as a state, even that how we allow for eligibility to family shelter makes it more difficult for people to access it, and the reason is cost. So we're always looking at those kind of things. Or if we know if we invest in programs like the MRVP program or the Section 8 subsidy program or any of those programs, it's going to prevent more people from being evicted. But we can't quite get there a lot of times. So, and I was hoping that maybe with the COVID crisis, we could look at a modification of the MRVP program, where we could do an MRVP CV program for like a 2-year program for people at 80% or below median income that were impacted by the pandemic. Because to me, that has more, we need RAFT, it's not in lieu of RAFT, but I think that what we're gonna see because of the the nature of the pandemic, which will probably last for 1 or 2 years, that would provide some longer term stability and certainty, even from a fiscal perspective. So I'm hoping that, I know on the federal level, there's been some things floated, but nothing's kind of made it out yet. So I'm just putting that out there as well.
That's great. Thank you, Brad. I think you're making the point that it's not, you know, it's these next 3 months. We don't have the question in that survey of, do you have the ability to pay your rent for the next 2 years? Or, you know, for people, one of the things that's come up in some of our other calls is for things like childcare. If you don't have the ability to send your children to daycare or full-time school, is someone going to have to step back from the workforce, and what kind of impact will that have on, again, people's ability to pay for their housing costs? So this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate all of you contributing. I will leave it just for any last comments. If anyone hasn't had a chance to speak, really do want to make sure everyone is able to contribute. Anyone?
Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in earlier. We were talking about the disproportionate rent amounts for immigrant populations, and I saw you unmuted, but I wasn't sure if that meant you wanted to jump in the conversation, Elizabeth.
She's saying no. Okay.
No. Okay.
If you do have anything to share, please feel free to do so. So as always, you can always reach out to us with any thoughts and comments. I'm going to share my screen one last time here, because I'd like to show you just a couple of ways that you can continue to engage with us at CHAPA. So please, as Abhi mentioned, you can join any of our committees. If you go to our website, all of our committee meetings are on there, so you can actually register. They're all virtual right now, which is actually wonderful for folks in the Berkshires, because it's a little bit more of an even playing field. No one is asking you to drive for 2 hours, and everyone's on a screen. So we've actually been really excited about how we're able to engage folks throughout the Commonwealth as a result of everyone being virtual. So please join us if you're able. We also have forums. We are still doing forums and events despite being virtual. So go to our website, to our events page, you'll see those there as well. We have a couple of forums that we've done already that I want to just direct you to that might be of interest. So one was on the setting up an emergency rental assistance program, and one was on RAFT. You can view those forums and those all of the materials on our website. And we do have our CHAPA dinner, which will be a little bit different this year, but please do save the date, October 21st, to come together and celebrate all of the work that we've been able to do. And lastly, a couple of other things you can do. You can sign up to receive our monthly housing briefs. And you can also engage locally through the Municipal Engagement Initiative. On our website, we have a place where you can tell us the community that you live in. Oftentimes we know where people work, but it's where we live that we can join boards, we can start coalitions, we can really get active. So if you tell us where you live, what we can do is connect you up with other people who live in your community who have expressed interest in getting involved in affordable housing work on the local level. And obviously you can become a CHAPA member. And I think that's it for now. Like I said, we will be sharing all of these materials on our website, and you can take a look at most of these resources are already up there under a news item. Jenna has been furiously sharing resources in the chat, as has Whitney. And just a reminder that if you click those 3 buttons next to the file, you can save the chat, but you can also go to our website to find any of those resources. So before we close it out, if there are any parting words from our regional partners or any of the CHAPA staff, I will leave it there. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Brad, do you want to say anything? Bye, thank you. Thank you. And again, thank you to Bank of America and our regional co-hosts, and to all of you for the work that you're doing. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.